In this video, I want to share a few tips on how I scored a 24 out of 24 in the MYP personal project. So one thing I always want to say is to always refer to the rubrics given by the IB themselves. The IB gives rubrics for Objective A, planning, Objective B, applying skills, and Objective C, reflecting. The IB can only score your report and your product, your personal project, based on these criteria. So as long as you fulfill everything here, no matter how much extra stuff you include, as long as you fulfill everything here, you will get a full score because the IB can't go against what they say that they'll mark you with. So although it may be a bit confusing to just write the report and do your personal project based off of these criteria, what I did to tackle that challenge is to include subtitles whenever possible. So what I did is I looked at the rubrics and I tried to separate them into many subtitles to have a better understanding of what I had to include in my report. And I also did this to assure my grade in a way because the examiner marking your personal project is only human at the end of the day. They may miss out some points and deduct your grade as a result, even if you may have included it somewhere. So assurance for me was to include everything under subtitles so that the examiner will know exactly where to go to get a certain piece of information. So they know for sure I included this and they're able to justify giving me a certain grade. So for criteria A planning, I separated it into learning goal, what sparked my interest in this goal and made it personal to me, the connection of this goal and the global context I chose to real life, prior knowledge and skills I had before I started working on the project, the product goal I had decided, and the product success criteria that I wanted to fulfill. I also included a plan to achieve the product, which included a long and short-term timeline. For criterion B, applying skills, there are two ATL skills that you should be including. One to achieve the learning goal, in which I chose to be research skills. So based on what I chose, I separated into how research skills were applied to extend my learning goal, an excerpt from my research plan, the strengths of the ATL skill, and a sample of a card's evaluation of sources, as well as the limitations for the ATL skill. So for whatever skill you give, you have to provide some sort of evidence, which I chose to do through the excerpt from the research plan, as well as the card's evaluation of sources. And the second skill that I chose, which is applying skills to create the product, is self-management skills. So how these skills were applied to achieve my product, and a sample of task distribution for a week, which is how I chose to show that I utilize self-management skills, and strengths of using the ATL skill self-management, as well as limitations to using that skill. As for criterion C, reflecting, the first thing I included was the impact of my project on my learning. What deeper knowledge did I obtain and what deeper understanding did I obtain on that certain topic to show progression from my project. And deeper knowledge and understanding of the global context that I chose, certain challenges faced and the solutions that I developed to meet those challenges, the impact of my project on my future learning, which may be career orientated or even on IBDP. And I included sample images of my final product because my product was one where you can't include the entire thing in the report, so I chose to include some sample images. And product evaluation, an excerpt from a survey I conducted, which was to evaluate my product. And finally, a product evaluation against success criteria, which was done based off of the results from my survey. And at the end, an overall appraisal of the process in completing the personal project and the results, which I separated into strengths, weaknesses, and conclusion. So separating all the criterions into all these subtopics made it so much easier to actually just organize everything that I had to include. So because you're also limited with the number of pages, I think there's 15 pages, I believe. You can't waste any words or any space on information that doesn't actually fulfill the rubrics because you're not doing anything to guarantee a grade. So knowing exactly what you have to include will make it easier to plan um, on like how much space do you want to spend on this part, how much you want to spend on this part. It makes it easier to generally organize everything. And another thing is to arrange items in tables whenever possible. This is also purely for organization. It makes it easier to understand and makes it easier to just save space a bit. For some things, space is really reduced once you put it within a table. For criterion A, there's the success criteria where you separate into the success criteria, exclamation on it, and the testing method you use to prove it. There's also the short and long term timetable, in which a long term timetable is more towards the general project, which includes the report making, meeting your supervisor, stuff like that. And the short term planning is more towards specifically what do you do to make your product. And criterion B, for me specifically, this is what I did for to prove my research ban. I showed my research question, complementary questions, and a few significant sources. And this is also a table I use to organize the evaluation of sources. And as mentioned, criterion B applying skills, my criterion B self-management skills was proven through a sample of task distribution per week. So I did the sort of table that showed how I created a table according to my energy levels when I'm more productive and how I decided when to do what in order to be able to complete my product by the end of the due date. So the tables for criterion B especially really depend on what skills you're choosing, what project you're doing. But generally, it's a good idea to keep in mind that you can include many things in tables. And criterion C, reflecting, I included a table for my success criteria and the appropriate weaknesses and strengths identified based off of the evaluation, as well as an overall appraisal. And just an extra tips to keep in mind that the product does not have to be a physical product. Although I did one, the IB also accepts a progression of learning a certain skill. So your final product can even be a video to show how you've progressed in learning a certain musical piece, for instance. And a minimum of 2 skills should be explained in criterion B, one for extending your learning goal and one for creating the product. For the evaluation survey in criterion C, it's recommended to get a minimum of 20 respondents. And the success criteria does not have to be fully fulfilled actually by the end of the project. There's a reason why we have that weaknesses column, so you can justify anything that was not able to be fully fulfilled. This is because the IB looks at the process more than the product. So there's no need to be so particular about how your product ends up as long as you justify everything in criterion C. And a last and final thing is to choose a project you love. This is a very long project and it's very difficult to keep up the motivation, the energy to keep going. But once it's something you love, it's really easier to keep going and to persevere and finish the project by the end. I've seen some people that didn't do it and had to suffer a lot just to finish a project because they didn't really like what they were doing. But in the end, they do call it a personal project, so choose something you love.